I didn't bring them down. I
So,
thought there was maybe an extra one.
again,
What's that? Yeah.
And these guys are trading cards up here like they're baseball cards or something.
You got it.
Giving us shit.
Yeah.
I got an hour. I got an hour tonight. If you want to trade it for a Yahweh, want to trade a Yahweh for an hour? I got one.
All right, so tonight we're gonna hit three, just three, because the third one I feel like the Lord really wants us to park at for a while. So I just want to hit two quickly as I was praying this afternoon, really, reading over each one and reading the scriptures. These were the ones that really jumped out at me. The first is, I'm not sure where it is on your card because I don't have a card right here. It's Jehovah Hosinu, the Lord our Maker.
Yahweh.
It's right below Yahweh, that's right. All right, so Psalm 95:6. This has a little different twist than you probably expect. Hey, there's a card. There it is, yep. Yeah, third up from the bottom. Psalm 95:6. Again, those of you that might remember the old Maranatha worship song, "Oh come, let us worship and bow down." Love that song. Do you have the chords for that, Carl?
I do, somewhere.
Like here?
Well, it'd take me a minute to find it. But
Oh, that'd be great if we could sing that at the end.
Okay.
That'd be awesome. Come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord, our God, our Maker. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. Usually when we think of the word Maker, we think of, that he originally created us, which of course he did. But this name of the Lord and the idea of Maker is actually in a tense that suggests he is our continual maker. So through the seasons of our lives, he actually makes us, and he never stops. Sometimes we stop allowing ourselves being made. And as I was thinking about this, I confess I keep my eyes open way too much at church. I don't know about you. I'm always looking around, seeing what's going on. And there's this one guy, and I'm not even going to tell you who he is, and I should probably talk to him when I get back. Maybe next Sunday I'll talk to him. I won't tell him I talked about him here. And I won't give you any identifying information. But it is terrible. This is just really terrible. He is the person I don't want to be.
Ooh.
That's pretty rough, right? From what I can tell. So a lot of disclaimers here. But here's what it is. Every Sunday, I see him traipse in behind his wife, sit down, not engage in worship, do nothing. His wife's worshiping the Lord, and he's just... Then when the service is over, he walks out. And, I don't know what's really going on in his heart. I don't want to judge it. But it just seems like he's not being made at all. And I've been watching him for years, doing the same thing every Sunday. Now I look at myself and I say, okay, where am I doing that? Where am I just kind of traipsing in behind my wife or somebody else and just doing the same thing, going through the routine and not really changing? It begs the question for us as men, as we approach God as our current maker, are we allowing him to be our maker through the seasons of our lives? And, there's never going to be a time, we talked a little bit about that this morning, the El Shaddai, name of the Lord. There's never going to be a time when God runs out of things to work on in our lives, right? I mean, he's got an agenda. And he's bringing us, just like this guy, bringing us to the table consistently. And my prayer for this guy, of course, is that that's not actually what's happening. And, I just don't see the whole picture. Just like if people were to look at me, they'd probably judge me the wrong way. But it's a picture, and the challenge to us as we approach God as our maker, he's our original creator. He knit us together in the womb, like Psalm 139 says. All that's great. But today, God is our maker. Today, he wants to make something in you and refine you and change me. And so, as we approach the Lord our Maker, when we say Jehovah Hosinu, which you've probably never said before in your life, but as you say that, and as you pray through this card in the future, you're really saying, God, I trust you, I commit myself to you, and I know that you today, you want to make something of me today. Let's not have a single day be wasted. Can you imagine getting to the day when you are expiring from this earth, and you can count day after day after day that you didn't change? Can you imagine what an empty feeling that would be to come to the end and have a whole calendar marked off? No, I didn't really change that day. No, nothing good happened that day. No, I rejected the Lord that day. No, I was callous to his voice that day. Through every season of life, he desires and is our maker. So that's Jehovah Hosinu. Love that one. Then Jehovah Nissi, towards a couple down, I think it's the top of the next page. Yep. Jehovah Nissi, one of my favorites, the Lord our banner. The Lord our banner. There was an old song with that one too from Integrity Music. Let's turn to Exodus chapter 17. The story here is the Israelites fighting, and it was the great story when Moses holds his hands up, everything goes well. When they start dropping, things don't go so well. Hands up, things are good. Hands down, not so good. Interesting. Isn't it interesting that God chose the posture of submission to show victory in battle? You ever think about that? Like, you don't run into battle holding your hands up, like unless you're planning to get beat. And the very sign of victory for God's people was someone holding his hands up. I just think that's very significant. We're going to talk about that a little bit more tomorrow, the idea of men holding holy hands up before the Lord and what that means. So the sign of submission became actually like the banner of the Lord. Submission equals the banner. But in verse 15, this is where we get this name of the Lord. And again, in my copy here of the New King James, it's hyphenated again, so I just love this. Moses built an altar after the battle was won and called its name, the Lord is my banner. The Lord is my banner. The Lord is my banner. I recently taught, occasionally I'll go in and guest teach in an elementary class. I love getting into the elementary class. I try to get into everyone each year, at least once, and do a lesson. So a couple of teachers asked me and my wife, we did it together, we did the War of 1812. And the War of 1812 is a fascinating study of war. It's a war that nobody won. The war began because really the Britain and France, they were in the Napoleonic Wars over in England. And to get at one another, they used America sort of as a pawn in the whole process. And they wouldn't let the American ships, the French wouldn't let the American ships trade with the British, and the British wouldn't let the American ships trade with the French, and they were kind of using the Americans. And the reason they were doing that was because just those Americans, they're really not a real country. Yeah, they gained independence, but really they're not a real country. So America's reputation on the world seems terrible. They had hardly a standing army. They had a pathetically small navy. In fact, in proportion to the British Navy, they were 1 to 25 in ships. They were a young country. And one of my favorite stories from the War of 1812 is the Battle of Fort McHenry, which was really an offensive on the part of Britain against Fort McHenry down in Baltimore. And they really expected, the British expected, this would just end the war, we'd be done with these Americans, we'd show them once for all who they really are, which would be nothing. And the story goes, Francis Scott Key was an attorney, and the government sent him out to negotiate the release of British prisoners from a British warship. And he gets out there and using all of his attorney skills is able to negotiate this tremendous release of prisoners. And as he's getting ready to leave, he's thinking kind of good about himself. And the commander on that ship said, well, I know we went through all this, but really it was an academic exercise. He's like, what are you talking about? He says, look out over the horizon. And he looked out way over the horizon into the Atlantic Ocean and saw, tens or dozens of dots on the horizon. He said, well, what's that? And the British commander said, that's the full British naval fleet coming to wipe out America at Fort McHenry. So he had fraudulently arranged for the release of the captives because he knew by the end of the night it was going to be over. So Francis Scott Key went down into the hold where the prisoners were, And he told them what was happening, and he said, you guys got to start praying. So they started praying. And they said, how will we know whether we're winning the battle or not? He said, well, I'll watch for the flag. I'll watch to make sure the flag is still flying. And of course, we all sing that at baseball games and have no clue what it means, right? Well, the flag, the United States flag, the Star-Spangled Banner, became the symbol of America staying alive in what would have been the critical battle, what was actually the critical battle of the War of 1812. So all night, Francis Scott Key is just watching Fort McHenry get pounded by artillery fire, and the flag stays up the whole time. At one time during the night, the flag is at this really contorted kind of position, and it stays there, and it's kind of going up and down. You can just barely see it. And the song says how, you know, through the dawn's early light, he looked up and the flag was still there. Come to find out later that the flag had been knocked down numerous times, but yet men, women, children kept picking it back up and holding it back up, just to show the resilience of the American people. So that's a neat story from the American War of 1812 that actually was a big turning point in the war. Nobody won anything except America won its reputation in the world as someone not to be reckoned with. But to me, it really reminds me of the fact that the Lord is our banner, and it connects back to the Moses story, that the battles that you and I face for the territory of our hearts are really not about us, ultimately. You know, and that's where we see the Lord, our banner, becoming very personal. And all the battles we're facing, both for ourselves and for our culture right now, where God's name is being blasphemed and that sort of thing, God is looking for people like those hardy Fort McHenry families who will continually raise up the banner again, even though it's getting shot at. And the Lord being our banner, what we're doing is we're raising the standard, not raising the standard in the sense of rules and regulations, but raising God's standard. We're God's standard bearers. As we consider him as our banner, in essence, just like with Moses needing Joshua and Caleb, was it Caleb? Who's the guy that held his arm? Come on, Bible scholars. Her, yes. Her holding up his arms. The Lord is our banner, but he wants us to hold it up for him. You know, not that he can't do it alone. But I just sense, as I was sharing a little bit last night in kind of my introductory thoughts, I think never before we're getting bombarded. You know, Fort McHenry is getting pummeled right now, figuratively. And the Lord is looking for us to, in our own purity, in our own walks with the Lord, in the decisions you make for integrity on a day-to-day basis, you're raising up the banner. But in the broader culture, in the culture battles that we're facing, he's looking for men to keep holding up the banner. And so to me, as I read this, it's God's, yes, he is our victory, he is our banner, but just like with Moses, he needs us to be holding up that banner. So I want to encourage you, no matter what comes our way, let's be a church. You know, we're holding up the banner, that's it. We're just making that decision. Individuals and families are holding up the banner of the Lord. So the last one I want to talk about, and this one I think the Lord would have us go a little bit deeper into, is Jehovah Makkah, and that is the second to last. And this is where I think we really get into this whole idea of the fear of the Lord. In Ezekiel chapter 7, in verse 9. The Lord shall smite thee. When's the last time you used that one in devotions? Right? The Lord will smite thee. Ezekiel chapter 7 and verse 9. This is to God's people, by the way. This is not like to the pagan nations around. We're okay with God smiting them, right? We expect that. Verse 9, and we could read the whole context, but just focus here on 9. My eye will not spare, nor will I have pity. I will repay you according to your ways, and your abominations will be in your midst. Then you will know, and here he gives us another name, that I am the Lord who strikes. I am the Lord who strikes. Jehovah Makkah. Well, this really shouldn't come as a surprise, nor should it be something we're not familiar with, right? I mean, we know from the New Testament that God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble. The picture there from the New Testament, but really also from this, is that if we're harboring pride, which essentially is not submitting to God, lack of submission to him, he will consistently allow us to smack up against him. And he becomes an opposer to his people that are not submitted to him. Sounds like the Lord's discipline to me, and that's what I feel like the Lord wants us to talk a little bit about. Now, the positive side is that to the humble, he gives grace. So as long as we're humbly submitted to him, he opens the doors for us, gives us everything we need to fulfill what he's asking us to do. That's really what grace is. Grace is the ability to fulfill what his commands are. And as long as we approach him humbly, he gives us that grace. But if we come with a prideful heart, he has no choice but to oppose us and really to discipline us. Let's look at Proverbs chapter 3, verse 12. The verse 11. Proverbs 3:11. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor detest his correction. For whom the Lord loves, he corrects, just as a father the son in whom he delights. And then all the way to Revelation chapter 3, verse 19. And this will be our springboard to really unpack this idea of the Lord smiting us. In the midst of his letters to the church, and specifically the Laodicean church, he says here in 3:19 of Revelation, as many as I love, I rebuke and chasten, or the word discipline there. As many as I love, I rebuke and chasten. Therefore be zealous and repent. So this is where we really get to the fearing of the Lord, in my sense, as far as one of his names that really should engender godly fear in us. When I think about fearing people, there's, as I shared a little bit this morning about the two kinds of fear, there's two kinds of people I fear too. There's the raving lunatic, that probably Freddie could tell about from all of his years in the police force. There's that kind of fear. And then there's the fear of the policeman, right, who doesn't hold a rod for nothing. But as long as you're doing what's right, you don't fear him, right? Isn't it amazing how quickly your view of a policeman changes depending on your context? Right? If you're driving a little bit too fast on the expressway and you fly a policeman, automatically you get that, that adrenaline rush and that fear wells up within you. But if you see someone else drive real fast, past the policeman, he's your best friend, right? It's the same way with my dad growing up. When I was doing what was right, when I was following the rules, when I was walking the way I should, Dad's my best friend. But man, it was not pleasant when I wasn't. And my dad was an old-fashioned dad. I know this might come as a surprise because I'm not that large. My dad's 6'5", 250 pounds.
That's it.
That's my dad actually telling me to be careful that I do what's right. No. Sorry. He's a big guy. And spankings were acceptable and regular in my household, particularly for me, more so than my two sisters. And I can remember specifically, there were times when I'd come home from school and get it from Mom. And the stereotypical wait till your dad gets home. That was it, too. And Dad would come home, and I had a real fear of him. And honestly, as I look back, I sure am glad I feared my dad, because I kept me from doing a lot of stupid things. And I did a lot of stupid things. But there were some even stupider things that I didn't do because I knew the reality of my dad's rebuke was going to bring some temporary pain into my life. And it's kind of a principle of how God operates with us, how he expects us to operate with our children, and therefore it's a good picture of how he operates with us. But the idea of discipline here, we have to get away from discipline being the idea of only punitive, when it comes to the Lord. It's not so much punitive. In fact, I've given some thought. I don't have a fully developed theology of it yet. I'm still working on it. But I do think that because Christ took all of our sins, he can't punish us in the sense of wrongdoing and we're actually receiving punishment. But he sure does allow us to face the full brunt of the consequences of our wrongdoing. And to me, those are two different things. The punishment was taken by Christ, so I don't believe my hardship is punishment per se. But he sure lets me face at times, the full brunt of the consequences. Also, at times, he'll use pain to wake me up. And that's discipline as well. I would hate to have anyone walk around as a child of God feeling like God was consistently punishing them. But just as a coach punishes his team with rigorous discipline, I'm okay with that in my theology with God. That works. That works for me. So discipline really is a sign of God's love. Allowing us to face hard times should be a reminder of God's love to us. And if he insulated us from all pain and never smote us, never was the one who would smite us, then you'd have to question whether he actually loves us or not. That doesn't make much sense in our modern sensibilities, right? Where if you love someone, you won't let any pain into their lives. In fact, that's become like the worldview of the day. Avoid pain. And anyone that brings pain to you must be the bad guy. And we've looked at God that way. But God's method, actually, of training his sons is through discipline and through hardship. And we all know personally, right? Don't point at anyone if it's someone in the room. But you know people that obviously were not disciplined very well as kids. Right? And that has a way of going all the way through till God gets a hold of a person. You know the kids that have not been disciplined well, and you know how they tend to turn out. Well, God is our Heavenly Father, not our Heavenly Grandfather. For all the grandpas among us, right? I'm constantly amazed at what my grandchildren can get away in my father's house. Get away with in my dad's house that I could never get away with. Being a grandfather is different from a father. You know, Jesus himself, it says, he underwent discipline. Look at Hebrews chapter 5, verse 8. Hebrews chapter 5, verse 8. Talking about Jesus, as the book of Hebrews so magnificently does. Talking about the process in Jesus' life. And it says in verse 8 that though he was a son, yet he learned obedience by the things which he suffered. Does that mean Jesus didn't obey before then? What it means is not that. It means that obedience is something you need to actually have to experience. You have to have the option not to obey in order to truly obey. And it's this whole idea of learning by going through difficulties. And one of the examples I have for that, besides being disciplined as a kid, was the first time I was just out of college and I was building my first deck by myself without my dad, which I remember as a huge challenge. It turned out really great. But the biggest challenge I had was cutting risers for the stairs. I don't know if any carpenters have ever cut risers. You know, the risers are the things, you know, that go beneath the steps. And there's mathematical equations to do it. And I must have spent a half a day writing all over a 2x10 all of my mathematical equations because I wanted to figure out exactly how to do it before I started cutting. I don't know why. I wasted much more time doing that. But I just, you know, I had a couple books out. I was trying to figure out exactly the rise and the run and all that kind of stuff. And finally I just gave up. I said, you know what, I'm never going to learn this unless I just get into it and start cutting. And what's the worst that happens? I screw up a few, 14-foot 2x10s or whatever. So I actually laid it out with my framing square, forgot all the calculations, just did the rise and run of the framing square, cut it out, and it worked perfectly. And I learned an important lesson. There are times when you just have to get into a challenge before you actually learn anything. You can't figure it all out on paper. You can't figure obedience and submission to the Lord on paper. In fact, if your life is really smooth, I would wonder if you're actually obeying. Because you only learn obedience when it's hard to obey, when it's challenging, when you're suffering. Those are the times when it's really hard to obey. You can't figure it out on paper, neither could Jesus. He actually had to walk through suffering as part of learning firsthand what obedience was. So here's how God disciplined us. And we've read a couple of these words. He rebukes. The word discipline means to train. He trains. And it does say that he punished. But again, I don't read that as punishing in a legal sense as much as punishing. We were talking about Hurricane Sandy, how the hurricane punished the shore. The shore didn't do anything wrong, but it was punished by the waves. So when you read punishment in the New Testament, think of it not when Jesus took our punishment, but the fact that Christians get punished. Think of it in the same terms as Hurricane Sandy, just pounding and punishing the shore. It's a figurative way of talking about what hardship is. And I want to look at three ways in which God does it. The first is God himself rebukes us and punishes us. Look at 1 Peter chapter 3:7. And this one is very apropos for us as men. 1 Peter 3:7. First Peter 3:7 says, "Husbands likewise dwell with them," which is your wives, "with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and being heirs